Hello, everyone, and welcome to our evening event for Tuesday for Sustainability Week. Today's theme is on water and waste, and today's event focuses on water and waste and how we can look into reducing Imperial's consumption and preventing the pollution of our natural environment. So today's event will be recorded. There will be an opportunity after our presentation to ask questions, and guests who are attending right now can submit via the question and answer, the Q&A facility here on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you do not wish your name to appear in the recording, please select to post your question as anonymous. And so today we'll first have our presentation from our Imperial Estates Team. Colin Nye, he will present on the water and waste management of the college as presented in the sustainability strategy that was recently launched.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the event. Thank you very much for that flattering introduction. As Stephanie said, my name is Colin Nye, and I'm the Energy Systems Engineer working at Imperial College. I work as part of the Engineering, Energy and Environment team. Sorry, I'll just check something there. I think that's fine. I work as part of that team, which is part of estate operations. So thank you very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the event. This is day 2 of Sustainability Week 2021, which so far I found very enjoyable, and I'm delighted to be a part of. I've been asked to do a short presentation on the college's recently published sustainability strategy for the 2021-2026 period, and I've been asked to focus on waste and water specifically. As my job title suggests, if you have any questions on carbon or energy as well, please post those and I'm sure we can answer some of those as well. So what are we looking for in our strategy for water management? Well, the sustainability strategy at its core is trying to distill down what the college is trying to achieve. It's trying to make it easy to understand in bite-sized chunks for the everyday public and staff and students as well as providing a stepping stone of ideas for what the college is trying to do to achieve its goals, not just in the short term, in the 5-year, but also in the longer term out to 2035, 2040 for its full sustainability targets. So looking at water management, and for all of these sections, there is a key aim that overarches our strategy. For water, that aim is to ensure the responsible management of water resources, reducing our consumption and preventing pollution of the natural environment. A fantastic aim, it has to be said. But how are we going to measure that progress and make sure that we achieve it? So firstly, we're going to be looking at the total water consumption across the college as a whole, and that will be measured in meters cubed per annum. Now, 1 meter cubed is equivalent to 1,000 litres, and obviously an annum is a year, so it's meters cubed per year. And the second measure, which is perhaps the most important one, most important one is water consumption per staff and student FTE. FTE in this case means full-time equivalent. So why is water consumption and per staff and student perhaps even more important than the total consumption? Well, they both are important in their own ways and they show different things. Water consumption as a whole can show where the college is in its trajectory of consuming, whether it's consuming more or less than the last year. And whilst year-on-year comparison is effective, it doesn't tell the whole story. The college changes day to day in most cases what it's researching, how it's researching, the laboratories that it's doing that in, and the environment that's doing that in. So it's not always as easy to compare last year to this year, to the future years, etc. So to try and understand and create a metric of efficiency, we've created the meters cubed per FTE metric. So this allows us to assess per staff and student a number, how efficient we're being used with our water. And that's a really key point, is efficiency in management. So moving on to water management actions. Just before I start this one, I want to talk about water as a utility. So typically it's seen less onus placed upon it. not just by the college, but by most of the industry and most establishments, companies, etc. It's an opportunity, it's an unfortunate reality that there are bigger carbon and cost savings to be had than water when we're focusing on things like electricity and gas. Imperial isn't blind to the fact that it's often neglected water, as many other industries have. But water has and is becoming even more important to us. And that's sort of shown by the fact that in 2018, April 2018, the college signed up to a Aquafund framework agreement, which is provided by the UK government, with a company called ADSM. ADSM look to, or help the college to monitor and target consumption. And to do that, they undertake building surveys, produce recommendations on how to improve our plant and efficiency, and how to run the equipment more efficiently, and help us to install AMR devices on large and medium consuming supplies. This AMR data, which is automated meter reading, that allows us to understand the time and intensity of our usage. So effectively, it gives us a profile throughout the day. Are we consuming outside of operating hours? Is there a top hat profile so it peaks in the middle? Or is it flat all day? If it's flat all day, there's potentially a leak that we're looking at, or a baseline leak, and we can then look to try and target that leak and stop it if there is one. Another thing that we're trying to do is to use a framework called the Laboratory Efficiency Assessment Framework, or LEAF for short, which is a bit easier to say. This is being rolled out to labs across Imperial and provides a methodology for lab users to understand their environmental impact and provides advice on how to be more sustainable in a lab setting. A lot of wet labs, especially chemistry wet labs, can consume a huge amount of water, condensation reactions, so using things like waterless condensers can be a real water saving. Autoclaves and glassware washing can also consume a lot of water, so making sure the best, most efficient plant is in use is really important. And the final thing that we're really trying to push in this 5-year period is to link as much of our or as many of our water services as possible to our building management system, or BMS. Now, Imperial College has the largest trend system in Europe. I still believe that's the case, which can be a huge blessing when we're trying to understand and control our systems. So we already do this for electricity and gas consuming plant. So to add water to this will allow us to set parameters for usage and times. So moving on to waste management. The aim for waste management is to ensure the responsible management of all waste streams arising from our activities, using innovative solutions to reduce our consumption of single-use items, to reuse materials and recycle waste produced as much as possible. Now, that's certainly a positive aim, and I have to say there's a huge amount of work that's being done behind the scenes by the Estate Operations Soft Services team, who are working to do just that. I believe they gave a very comprehensive talk earlier today, and I believe these are recorded as well. So if you missed that one, I think it was the 12 o'clock talk today. If you missed that, I would suggest going back and looking at that. As I say, they gave a very comprehensive look at what their team are doing. But from a strategy perspective, what measures of progress is the strategy looking at? First thing it's looking at are recycling rates. How much waste are we diverting from landfill? The second thing is the emissions resulting from waste activities. That's measured in tons of CO2e, so equivalent per annum. And the final thing it's looking at is the emissions saved through a scheme called WARPIT. So WARPIT is effectively a reuse framework. I suppose the bread and butter of WARPIT would be Department A has 10 desks, 30 chairs that it's looking to dispose of, doesn't need them anymore. Department B has no chairs, everybody's sitting on the floor, and then Department A can give those chairs to Department B, and it saves them from being sent to landfill and wasted. And again, that's saved as tons of CO2e that's averted by that reuse. The final point that I wanted to touch on was the waste management actions. So a key consideration for waste management is what's called the waste hierarchy. So as we move up the waste hierarchy, that's what we're trying to do, from red to green. So disposal is landfill, waste prevention is the epitome of what we want to be. So at its forefront, you want to prevent as much waste as possible from being generated. If you don't generate the waste, you don't have to manage it if it's never created. For waste that is unpreventable or unavoidable, can it be reused in its current form? Plastic bottles, glass beakers, jars, boxes, packaging, etc. If an item is required and cannot be reused, try to make sure that it can be recycled or composted. Cardboard or compostable packaging instead of polystyrene, for example. It's often worth discussing with suppliers if it's a frequent purchase that you're making, of whether they can provide more environmentally friendly packaging, and if not, and they have to use polystyrene because that's all they offer, maybe they can take some of that polystyrene back when they make the next delivery and reuse it. Finally, in the last resort, and environmentally the worst thing to do for waste is landfill. So items in landfill typically lead to the evolution of a wide variety of greenhouse gases that decompose, quite often anaerobically, so without oxygen. And this can lead to a far higher global warming potential evolving in the gases than CO2 directly. So as a college, we're trying to continue working to move waste up the hierarchy, so from landfill to recycling, reuse and prevention as much as possible. We're also trying to improve the usage of specialised bins, and you guys can help with that through appropriate segregation of waste streams. So if there are 3 bins, one is general waste, one is cardboard or mixed recycling, should we say, and one is food waste. Make sure you don't put a food waste item in any of those other bins. So that's reducing cross-contamination. Cross-contamination in waste is something that can prevent tons and tons of recyclable materials that could be recovered or recycled and make it be landfill because it's not economical to clean the waste, the material. And make sure that we can explore new and innovative options for diverting a waste stream from landfill as they arise. So thank you very much for listening to that presentation today. I'm looking forward to your questions as they come up. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email sustainable@imperial.ac.uk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colin, for the presentation. I think it's given everyone a good context and understanding to what the sustainability strategy is looking forward to doing in terms of water and waste. So let's move on to our next section, which is a panel discussion from our 3 speakers. So today, let me introduce myself as moderator of today's discussion. My name's Stephanie. I'm the Ethics and Environment Officer at the Imperial College Union. And as a student representative, I will be here to moderate the discussion and contribute student perspectives. So today's first speaker, our presenter from the earlier presentation, Colin Nye. He's an energy systems engineer as he's presented himself from the Imperial Estates Division. So he's studied a dual honors degree in applied environmental science and biology at Keele University. Before joining Imperial, he's previously worked as an energy coordinator for the University of Cambridge and energy management engineer for Norbord Europe. So our second speaker for today is Dr. Ana Mijic. She's a senior lecturer here in the Water Systems Integration and is a co-director of the Center for Systems Engineering and Innovation. She is part of the Faculty of Engineering, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. She is leading the development of novel systems tools focused on quantifying the interaction between the water cycle and sustainable development. And our final speaker from today is Ahab Syed, and he is the founder and director of innovation of Biome. Biome is a research and development-led company that aims to promote a healthier and more sustainable built environment. He has over 6 years of experience as a sustainable designer, engineer, circular economy strategist, and built environment innovator, with a passion for creating a biometric nature-inspired circular feature. Biome are members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So let us wait no more and allow me to introduce a question or a point of discussion for us to kick off our panel. So following to the presentation from Colin in the afternoon earlier today and what we've heard just now, in practical terms, how quickly do you think that Imperial can implement the sustainability strategy if it hasn't already?
I'm certainly happy to pick that one up to start with, as I think it'll be sort of my team that's, I suppose, doing a lot of this work from an energy, carbon, and certainly water perspective. I'd say a lot of the work is and has been done for the last few years. Imperial is certainly pushing forward on this. Until this year, the college didn't have a carbon reduction target. That's only been set this year, so from that aspect, we're certainly behind a lot of our peers, especially Russell Group peers. But we are now looking to make a big push to make sure that we can catch up, and in some cases exceed those peers. So one of the key things we're trying to do is to implement a science-based target for our carbon and energy management reductions. So at the moment, our target that we've set is carbon neutrality by 2040, with a 15% reduction in this 5-year period against an 1819 baseline. From a water perspective, we've got a lot of catching up to do, not just against peers, because a lot of our peers are not doing great either. But I'd certainly say we can put a lot of the groundwork in this 5 years with a view to really delivering everything that we're aiming to do by that 2035, 2040 target.
Shall I maybe follow up to what Colin has said? I think it's an interesting topic, and I'm really happy that we have a session which is really dedicated to water, because as a researcher working in water management, this is something we face all the time, that energy and carbon rightly are at the forefront of the policy and the sustainability agenda. But water in many ways, I would argue, is equally important. And I think on the implementation side, there are two aspects. So one is really what we can do quickly. So quick wins and quick fixes we can do to start being sustainable. Colin mentioned some of these measures. We can talk about them during the evening. There are ways of, say, communication and influencing the reduction in the water demand. There are opportunities around knowing what the data are, so how much we use water and communicating that number. There are options to introduce water efficiency. The technology exists, so it's basically just rolling it out. But the second aspect, which I think, at least from my perspective, is equally interesting, is how ambitious we want to be in setting these science-based targets and ambitions for being sustainable in the context of water. And I would like maybe part of discussion tonight to go in that direction as well, because there are concepts which we, again, are still developing, but also that the industry and the practice are thinking about, which are equivalent to, say, net zero carbon. So concepts such as water neutrality, and we can talk about what that means. And also maybe expanding the focus. So Colin mentioned at the beginning, quite broad definition of the water management, which is consumption and pollution and impact on surface runoff. So it's a rather complex problem, but I think we can do a lot if we work together.
So I could just jump in with a bit of feedback, Colin. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm not going to say very much about water because I think Anna's got that more than covered, but I'm going to focus a little bit more on the waste side of things. So just for background, we're a company that takes inspiration from nature to implement biomimetic approaches to waste management, to resources in general, and just also to production and construction in the built environment. And I would like to challenge you a little bit and just, ask a question about whether there has been a consideration to go beyond carbon neutrality in your current approaches, where you're sort of transforming the resource management approach into one that is regenerative and one that's actually adding value and having a positive impact on the environment. I think the carbon neutrality by 2040 target is very reasonable, and I do understand a big machine like Imperial College is going to take quite some time to actually reach that target. But small steps that are carbon negative, that are achieving that regenerative impact, and also to echo what Anna said, it's not just about carbon, it's about the full picture, it's about biodiversity, it's about resource depletion, and looking at all of those different aspects. Has there been any desire to go into the direction of regenerative resource management? And if not, is that something you would be, interested in exploring further?
So I don't work with the waste day to day, but from what I've seen and people I've spoken to, it's not something that we're looking at currently. Certainly, I'm sure those people there would be more than happy to have that conversation and to do that, to look to achieve that. I think for our sustainability strategy, the 21-26 version as it exists now, the carbon and energy is kind of the scope 1 and 2 is where our targets are currently based. And I'm hoping that with a lot more science-based work, that we can really actually take in help from people like Anna and yourself, that we can really create a really robust strategy for the 27 to 2040, 2050 into the future. It's certainly something that we should be looking to do, completely agree. And certainly be looking for any feedback or help that we can do to achieve that.
Amazing. I think that's really good to hear, because I'm very aware of the research that comes out of Imperial. We've got members of alumni from Imperial in our team, and we work with Imperial as well. I think it would be really great to achieve some quick wins in looking at current waste streams and just looking at how you can implement a regenerative resource management approach to them. A very quick, easy solution would be to look at your food waste, for example, which we can create sheet material out of that then your students can use for modeling. And that takes, 2 different waste streams out of the equation completely. So yeah, just as an example.
Interesting.
So we have a question from the floor regarding could we work towards water neutrality within college and how difficult this is to achieve? So I remember, Ihab, you mentioned potentially achieving carbon neutrality through the sustainability strategy, and maybe Anna, you have more insight with your work that you're working on right now.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, maybe Colin wants to just set the scene, maybe by explaining what actually net zero carbon means, because I think that's an interesting parallel, and then I can follow up and just add on what are the ideas around water neutrality.
Thanks for putting me on the spot there. So in terms of water neutrality, it's not something that I've heard of until spoken about today by yourself, Anna. But in terms of zero carbon and carbon neutrality as a whole, certainly put a little shine on that. So they're very different terms. I think zero carbon and carbon neutrality are often used interchangeably. I would say incorrectly in a lot of times. It's very important to note that the college is looking to achieve net zero carbon. So what net zero carbon means is that we're not looking to be carbon neutral. Net zero carbon means that so in terms of net, that's the minimum that we have to use to operate. So the absolute bare minimum energy, so scope 1 and 2 emissions. So that's what we have to produce or have to use to be to run, to do what we need to do on a day-to-day basis. And we want to do that as effectively as possible. So to reduce baseline, if you will, and to be as minimum above that baseline as we possibly can. And so that net zero is effectively what we're trying to achieve. So to be as sustainable as we possibly can be without just turning up, packing up and going home.
So from the water perspective, I think it really depends how you define water neutrality. The definition that is probably what most people are working with is basically offsetting the water use from any new development. So the example would be, say, for White City, we are building the new campus and we calculate the total predicted water demand for the whole campus. And then we say, well, you know, this area is really stressed, which it is. So if I'm right, the campus White City will be drained to Mogden wastewater treatment plant, which is currently at the full capacity. So there is really no room for expansion. And at the moment, all new developments have automatic right to connect to water systems. So it's a very challenging situation for water companies. But the water neutrality would mean that, for example, all the demand, all the water use for the White City campus, we provide on site. So we find different ways of either getting the rainwater as a resource, other examples or ways of water recycling, or if we can't do it on the site, which is probably very difficult, then we see and we find other locations within the, say, water supply zone or wastewater zone that we can invest in the projects that would offset that demand, because in the end what matters is the aggregate effect. So that's one way of thinking. The other way of thinking, for example, for South Kensington campus would be to say, if we know how much water we are using at the moment, say, I mean, the water consumption in London is quite high. So say if we have something around, I don't know, 180 liters per person per day, we may want to go to, say, 100 liters per person per day. If that's our target, then the neutrality means that we want to offset that difference. But again, this is the most simple way of thinking about water neutrality from the perspective of water use. Again, there is an element which is linked to surface runoff, so impacts on flooding. There is an element that's linked with the pollution, pollution coming from the wastewater discharges, which is a pretty big problem for rivers, and then also the pollution coming from the surface runoff, which is again big problems for rivers. So again, I think it depends on the level of ambition, and I agree that probably we should take things in steps, but I would like to have maybe that big picture at least sketched out as a vision, and then working towards the really broad view around water management.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make about offsetting. So offsetting in terms of carbon and energy, or should we just say energy rather than carbon? In terms of energy is one of those things that is often maligned as something we try to avoid or do as a last resort. But I suppose for water, it's a different case, because it's something you have to do more offsetting for water than perhaps for gas and electricity. And absolutely, I completely agree with you, Anna, that we should be looking at that big picture right from day dot. We have to have that goal of where we want to get to. Otherwise, we're just kind of charge off in different directions, and to have that goal is very important.
And Colin, when it comes to you know, carbon neutrality as a target, you know, is the entire life cycle of resources that are used on site, particularly looking at waste streams, is that taken into account at all? So I think that would cover things like water as well as carbon and energy, but will also take into account impact on biodiversity, resource depletion, and it kind of gives you a much more accurate representation of the impact of that resource being used. So I'm just wondering, when you say carbon offsetting, it is often definitely perceived in a negative way, and you know, sometimes it is just used as a kind of way of propagating a process or a method that is environmentally damaging. But you know, if you are carrying out a process that takes into account other areas of your environmental impact, like resource depletion, energy and water, that does at the same time offset carbon, and then you have a kind of full picture life cycle assessment of that resource. Do you feel that that would give you more, measurements and more measurables that allow you to work towards that target?
It's an interesting point. I think full life cycle costing, not just of carbon, of energy, of water, but as you say, absolutely of the environmental side, the waste side, and the ecology side as well, which is something that's quite often overlooked. Mm-hmm. I'm not entirely sure what the project's strategy is for that, but I'd like to think that there's a line in the project strategy that says something akin to having a net positive impact on the environment from a biological point of view, from a biodiversity point of view, or from a waste management point of view. Whether there is or not, it's not something I know, but I'd like to think there is, and if there isn't, then we can certainly look to try and get that in there. Absolutely.
Cool.
But if I can make a quick comment, I think the point about the life cycle is really interesting, and I think it's very important, because if you go into life, I think first in the life cycle you really see where the weight is. Is it on the kind of construction, or is it within the operation? And I think we do see, particularly for water, that I think for energy as well, that operation very often, especially in the built environment, takes a lot of weight in the whole life cycle assessment. The other interesting aspect, I think, if we talk about water, is around maybe supply chains, and I think this is something that is probably maybe a next step, but it's equally important, because there's lots of embedded water in the food we use, in the product we use, and I guess that goes with the ambition on promoting the sustainability, because I think for the universities, especially big university such as Imperial, there is a bit of that reputation there as well, and how much we convey the message around the sustainability. We now have the transition to zero pollution academic strategy, which is the 5-year strategy that the Imperial is championing, really looking at different aspects of pollution and how we can transition. And I think maybe part of that could be looking inwards and having our estates and our campuses almost as a kind of showcase and living labs for some of these ideas. And I think this is something really interesting to think about, because I think demonstrating some of these sustainability ideas sometimes has really, really big value of changing people's behavior, which ultimately will drive everything, isn't it? The way how much we use resources will define the level of sustainability we will have.
I think if the college, you're absolutely right, if the college is seeking to maintain its world-leading status in research and academics, or academia, should I say, it has to lead from the front, not just in academic and research capability, but also in sustainability. The world is changing incredibly quickly, and in recent staff and student surveys for student organisations, where they ask, is environmental sustainability targets something you look at? And increasingly more and more staff and students are saying, yes, it's important to us that where we work, especially in an academic environment, they are working towards helping not just research, but also the environment. And the estate side of it plays a huge part in that. So it's massively important that we pick this up and run with it. I think up to now there's been a lot of work being done. I wouldn't say there hasn't been, but I think there's been a far greater onus placed upon it in the last 2 or 3 years. I've been at the college for 18 months now, and I've certainly seen a huge shift even in just that 18 months. The notion of having a target that we'd set for Scope 1 and 2 emissions 18 months ago was laughed at, and now here it is. We've committed to it. And quite a decent target as well of sort of 2040. There are more challenging targets. We could have set 2030, but we also want to have a sense of, being able to achieve that target. We can say 2030, but realistically, that's not going to happen for something as large as Imperial College. That is, it's like an oil tanker. It takes a long time to turn around, and it takes a long time to get where it needs to go. But it does definitely start from the top and from even academics, just like yourself, Anna, sort of pushing that internally to make sure that we're utilising ultimately the brains that we have within our own institution to be the best and to be that shining example. Otherwise, why should anybody listen to us?
I think that's a really interesting point on you know, how times have changed and how perceptions have changed. And I think the amount of awareness around the way sustainability is measured has grown tremendously, not just amongst academics, but amongst the general public. So I think this could be a really great opportunity for an institution like Imperial College to continue that position of leadership and sort of stem into, you know, sustainability leadership and regeneration leadership. And, you know, it's not really, although it isn't really difficult to make a sudden change and to, you know, have a target for 2030 that is really radical, you know, that's the kind of change that we need at the moment. That's the kind of action that we need at the moment. And we must never underestimate the power that an institution like Imperial College has over its supply chain and over its suppliers. And just leading on from Anna's comment, I actually had a note here of a question I wanted to ask, and it's what level of influence do you feel you have on your suppliers? And, you know, are you able to kind of encourage your suppliers to implement change in order for that target to be brought closer and for that change to happen also from within, but also from the ecosystem in which you operate?
I guess this is probably a question for Colin.
Yeah.
So I thought you said Anna in your question.
Sorry, no, it's mainly, you know, what level of influence do you feel you have over your suppliers? For example, if reaching the carbon neutrality target by 2030 is difficult or impossible because you are tied into long-term contracts with certain suppliers, are you able to encourage those suppliers to make a transition or transform their operations in order to keep you on as a client, in order to continue to work together?
I mean, in terms of our sort of net zero carbon commitments, that at the moment that's purely for scope 1 and 2. So that would be energy and gas, so direct emissions and indirect from electricity. At the moment, our biggest challenge is moving away from gas heating to electrifying or air source heat pumps, water source heat pumps, that kind of thing. We're running a few trials at the moment, and a couple of hoping to run a few trials, should I say, over the next few months, and start to really make a dent in that. But in terms of for water, I think just at the moment, this is the first year we've really quantified our water emissions in a carbon intensity perspective. That was done in the 1819 report that I put out earlier in the year, or last year now, it's 2021. And there'll hopefully be a second version of that, so the 1920 report, which will be coming out in the next 3 or 4 months. And it's the first time we'd really looked at not just, I suppose, the scope 2 side of water, but also the scope 3 in general. So supply chain management, as you're sort of touching on there, is something that I think we do have influence on to some extent, but not. I think there's a danger of sort of, I mean, although Imperial College spends 15 to 20 million pounds a year in its utilities budget, the reality is that of the company we're spending that with, that's less than 0.1%. You know, not even a 0.1% of their annual turnover. So yes, we do have influence to a certain extent, but it's when we pull together with other groups. So as part of a larger organisation, we can then increase our percentage of their turnover and have that more discussion with them. I think it's easier to have that with with Scope 3 side of things. So food suppliers especially have been very keen to work with us, particularly with sort of palm oil sustainability, fish sustainability, so MSC, and even FSC for paper products. I think there's much more ability to have influence on the lower value side of things, because we make up more of their business turnover, so they're more interested in listening to us. And I think it's also something that a lot of companies that are sort of producing these goods, selling these goods, are now interested in themselves. They see sustainability, are now starting to see sustainability, should I say, as a selling point for their goods. And so they're seeking external certification, which is something that we can encourage by, when we're doing tenders for goods and services, making sure we ask those questions about sustainability. You know, what's the radius, or what's the carbon mileage of this? How far is that to travel from sort of field to production to our doorstep? Especially for food, that's a massively important thing, is buying local. You know, the carbon miles, or food miles, should we say, that is on a lot of our produce in the UK is absurd. You know, we buy bananas from Colombia, from Ecuador, and they are pennies. You know, you can buy bananas for very, very small amount of money, but when you consider the amount of carbon mileage on them, they shouldn't be anywhere near as cheap as they are. But people buy them still because they're cheap.
I think that was an interesting look into how we should evaluate our choices in lifestyle, not just within on campus, like whether it's catering at our outlets for food, but it's also like within our own lifestyles. I think one point Anna mentioned when she was addressing water neutrality, she raised the point about harvesting rainwater for potential use. This is also from two questions from two of our audiences. They're asking whether Imperial has any plans or considerations to use perhaps like rainwater capture to use for low-grade uses, such as like flushing the toilets, or like perhaps like irrigation on some of the grasses we oversee.
Yeah, so it's certainly something that we have one system at the moment as part of the City and Guilds building. That's working fairly well in terms of grey water usage. I haven't got the exact figures of how much it saved with me to hand, but I do know that it has been working well for the last few years. As a wider, should we put more in? I would say yes. I think utilising grey water can be an incredibly effective way of reducing consumption direct from the pipes, if you will. But we have to be very careful, as you say, about how we use that grey water. Great choices are sort of flushing toilets or things like that, where that water is not really coming into contact with people. So by that I mean we can't use it in sinks, we can't use it for showers, drinking, etc. But certainly flushing toilets is kind of the classic way of utilising grey water. I'm not sure if that's something that the college is sort of mandating in its buildings. I know that on the White City campus, I don't believe there's any grey water harvesting, which is potentially a missed opportunity. But it's certainly going to be a lessons learned, and there's going to be a big review of the current buildings that have been put in White City in the north side before we move to the White City South campus, which is hoping to expand the next few years. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, not just from water, not just from energy, but from the whole building process as a whole part. And those lessons learned are going to be really important.
So if I can just make two comments related to that. I think you have also mentioned, Stephanie, so we can recycle grey water. That's, I think, what Colin was talking about. We can also capture rainwater. I think that was maybe the question from the audience. And definitely rainwater harvesting has a huge potential. Technology is relatively simple. and you can use it in a very simple way. So basically having a tank and then just reusing water for simple uses such as irrigation, for example. It could require a bit more technology if you want to fit it back into the building system. So basically to reuse that water for, say, toilet flushing. But technology is well known. So it is huge missed opportunity, I would say, especially for the new campus. But retrofit for rainwater harvesting retrofitting is also not that complex. We have a big project now looking at the water management in London, and we are trialing rainwater harvesting really from the perspective of having it also as an intelligent way of water management. And I think Colin mentions in his introductory presentation around using the systems in a smart way. And I think this is that next level maybe of ambition, because we can just implement maybe the technology that exists, but we can also be one level more ambitious and say, we'll have all of these new approaches, and then we can maximize them by really trying to use all the knowledge. And I think I would really advocate for using the Imperial staff and maybe external partners as well. But there is lots of knowledge and lots of work that has been done at Imperial that could be utilized. And I think people would be really happy to support the strategy with ideas and solutions around controlling these storages based on, say, weather information, so that we can operate them in a way that we maximize their performance. I think thinking about that would be really interesting, especially if we're going to have more information about the water use in the system. I would also argue that we would ideally maybe monitor also the quality of the water coming out of our systems. Again, that would be all more easily be implemented in Y-City, but I really think there is some opportunity also in South Kensington that we can look at the opportunities for retrofit. And again, trying to offset as many of the water use on site is definitely beneficial, considering the planned growth for London. I think, having a big picture of what is happening around us is also very important.
It sounds like we need to have more conversations, Anna, about water and part of the strategy. Certainly would look to use your knowledge and expertise, I think, for moving forward. I don't know if you had any input with Paul Lickus into this one, but I'd certainly be looking to utilise you as an asset moving forward from a state's perspective for water, absolutely.
I think one question that many of our audiences probably have regarding the sustainability strategy, and especially in water and waste, is what metrics we will be using to measure progress, and how will these be determined? How are they measured? Are they estimated from our overall usage? And how accountable do we think these measures are in terms of pushing Imperial towards a more sustainable direction?
Well, thankfully, these are things that I did touch on in the presentation. In terms of measuring progress for water, I think there were two key points that are measured, or should I say alluded to, in the strategy, and that's the total water consumption, so the overall level of water consumption, and also the consumption per FTE. Those are the two that we've committed to monitoring year on year and reporting on year on year. And they, as I say, have currently and will be moving forward been reported in our carbon management sustainability activities report.
I guess maybe the interesting question there, Colin, is what is, again, is it the target is where we want to get to, which again, probably the first step is to know how much we are using. But then I think we'd be really interested to see how, where do we trying to drive that demand to, I mean, what is the good number? Again,
I'd love to know.
Yeah, I know. But again, so it would be good to see those numbers when you have them. Targets for example, for domestic water use, I think at the moment is around 100 liters per person, and people are talking about 80 liters per person as a quite ambitious target for domestic water use. So I mean, at Imperial it would be a bit different pattern because it's the basically working water use, which is slightly different. One way that maybe I would suggest that we may also look at the targets is combining the data with the modeling. So we do have capacities to simulate the water demand. We can, if we have the data, that we can also validate the models, and that could give us a really nice idea where we are at the moment. Is the baseline is really important, and then we can also try to see, depending on how ambitious we want to be, what needs to happen, and how. And then I guess for Imperial is also important how realistic the different targets would be. But I think that would go back to what maybe we're talking about, the science-based targets, to basically combine the climate information from the operation of the building, a bit of information about the behavior and the water use, and then predictive modeling that we could use to set, I guess, ambitious but also realistic targets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the moment, in terms of the water side of it, there is no set targets for where we want those to be. I would certainly say we should be setting some, but I think you're absolutely right that at the moment, understanding where we are, where we have been historically, is kind of a key thing. And I think as sort of this next 5-year period goes by, I think more and more Russell groups, universities that are far more intensive in their research than sort of a lot of other universities will be publishing their data. There'll be some more benchmarks available for similar institutions. We'll have our own numbers to benchmark against, and that modelling capacity as well will be intrinsic in understanding where we should be.
I think I would actually completely echo what Anna said for water regarding the waste side of things, in terms of it's really great having the target of carbon neutrality by 2040, but breaking that down into what that means for carbon, for waste, for energy, for all those other different measurements of sustainability or even having a regenerative impact, I think is where the sort of key aspect of improving the reports can focus on, because I think we kind of expect quite a high level of detail and investigation, and to dive quite deep into the detail, as Imperial, as Anna highlighted. Imperial has incredible amounts of knowledge in their academics and their students, and the amount of work and spin-offs that are coming out of there. If you just look at those alone, you can have a fully functioning regenerative campus, using just these technologies alone. So I think being able to implement those, being able to create measurable roadmaps towards achieving that carbon neutrality may actually allow you to achieve that at a much sooner rate than possible than expected. But one thing I also want to say is it was really great to hear the recognition that there may have been a missed opportunity at White City, because I think a university campus is an incredible opportunity to create almost a little mini city that is representing to the world what is possible. The idea about rainwater harvesting, that's something we're implementing in our production facilities, and it's really simple. It really doesn't take much to do. But once you've got that infrastructure, you can then implement it into irrigation systems, and it can then flow into other things, and then you can create food on campus and grow it for the students to consume. And it can become a really a really positive exercise that can have an impact way beyond just Imperial College and the country that you're in, but they can have global significance in terms of really showing leadership.
If I can just quickly add on that, I mean, I think sometimes, we as a kind of from the academic side could be a bit kind of ignorant of the reality, and I do recognize that officially on recorded now. But I think even if we would have a small part of the campus, it doesn't have to be the whole campus. We can start small with maybe some demo facility and kind of one part really testing different approaches, and then the things that work could be upscaled. Is maybe something, at least I would be very, very happy to discuss with whoever is responsible for that.
Well, it's funny you should say that. We are hoping to create sort of the ideal building, if you will, with the Dyson School of Engineering. So it's been recently purchased. It was an old post office building just between the Natural History Museum and the college at South Kensington. It's one of those buildings that has had a huge amount of work put into it from a retrofit perspective. There's a lot of lessons that we have learned from that. There's a lot that was done well, and to be perfectly honest, there's a lot that was done poorly, especially from a controls perspective. And what we're trying to do is create the ideal building, not just from an energy perspective, from a water perspective, a waste perspective, as a whole, a system, which is kind of a miniature version of what I think you guys are trying to say about White City being a missed opportunity, which completely agree with you. Absolutely, it's a huge missed opportunity. And I'd like to think that the college as a whole has learnt from those mistakes and will do that on White City South. Ideal building is a great idea.
I'd love to hear more about that as well.
Well, hopefully we'll get you guys on board to discuss. It's something that I think it's something we're taking on in the engineering and energy team and environment team to try and do to create that perfect building. It's going to be a lot of work, but it's something that needs to be done to show what's possible, so that we can then use that as the yardstick, if you will, for other buildings across the campus.
Yeah, as a student, White City to me is kind of like the new futuristic possibilities that Imperial could be. So it'll be great to see if like rainwater capturing technology could be implemented, or any kind of better facilities that could be used to achieve water neutrality, carbon neutrality, so on and so forth. And as a final wrapping point for today's discussion, we have a question from the audience about how, like, as Imperial is a research intensive place, a college, a campus facility, how could we, in terms of water and waste, reduce our consumption of that and potentially like minimize the pollution we cause from our lab work?
So I don't work in lab, so I cannot answer that question. Maybe my quick answer to this one, I think it's really interesting from the research perspective, is that so the call that we applied for recently, which was around the digital sustainable societies, had the project sustainability, something that we had to think about as a criteria for the evaluation. So we had to think about our research and how we can make it sustainable. What they did use, for example, as a way of thinking about it, is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that is something to maybe have in mind. Again, thinking about how much water is used in different activities is a good starting point. There are, for example, water footprint calculators, really simple calculators that we can calculate quickly if we don't know how much water we're using, which are water intensive activities. Again, same goes for, say, carbon. So we have, for example, in that call, and we are doing that now, isn't it? We are doing all of these online meetings. I mean, this has some footprint, but it definitely does reduce the travel footprint and so on. So I think thinking about the activities is always a good first starting point.
I think as a company, we do operate labs, and I think very much like what Anne said, it is all about measuring and having the right kind of intelligent systems in place in your labs. So for us, for example, we measure every single input and output in every single process before any experiment is carried out. We fill a form actually explaining every potential environmental impact of that research, and then we go ahead and actually cut out any type of environmentally damaging processes and replace them with ones that are more sustainable, down to all the chemicals that are used, any kind of processes that are used for cleaning or processing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there alone to save a lot on energy, on carbon, on waste and on water. But I think it has to be very intentional, and it has to be in the culture of the team and in the culture of the processes and the procedures that are built. But just on the point of, you know, how do you reduce the usage in labs in particular with certain scientific processes? You know, you do create some hazardous waste, and it's really difficult to find a good solution for that. But there are biological solutions that can potentially help remediate that. So we are developing mycelium strains or strains of fungus that can consume plastic and consume all kinds of waste streams. So there are, solutions out there. They may not be scaled up yet, but a university is a perfect place to trial these things.
Yep, I think it'll be very interesting to see, once again, the point about the university being a mini city and a place of possibilities to implement what our society could potentially be to develop these technologies. So today's discussion has been really interesting with all three of our speakers from today, Colin, Anna, and Ehab. So we will be wrapping up today's discussion. So thank you all for coming and joining us for today's discussion. Thank you to our audience for attending today's event. And we'd like to thank the Sustainability Week team for organizing this entire week and for assisting in and supporting today's events organization. And as a final thank you, we'd like to thank Kieran Brophy and Leah Adamson from the Institute for Molecular Science and Engineering. They've been managing this entire event behind the scenes. They've been ensuring this event is running smoothly. So thank you to them as well. Once again, today's event has been recorded. It will be uploaded to the YouTube channel for the Institute of Molecular Science and Engineering. And right now on your screen, there is a Sustainability Week schedule for the rest of the week. So be sure to check out the other events we have coming up. Thank you, everyone.